Hello and welcome back to the course on Python programming. In today's tutorial, we will create some lists. So we spoke about how lists work and what they are in the previous tutorial. Now it's time to get our hands dirty and do some practice. So let's get started. I'm going to name this notebook Let's Create Some Lists. And here we're just going to start off by creating a very simple list. We'll just call it my first list equals. And to create a list, we just need to use the square brackets. And in the square brackets, we'll just type in some numbers that are going to be the contents of our list. So a list, as we remember, is a data structure. So that is how we're going to be storing that information. So now if I want to ever look at my list, I just type in its name and it prints out those elements that we put in there. And we can also check what type this data structure is, my first list. And you'll see that it returns a list indeed. So this is a bit different to R. If you're coming from R, there a list or a vector in R would have a type of the specific elements that it contains. Because in Python a list can contain a mix of data types, you can't just say that this list has type integer or type a string or boolean, because it can contain different types, and that's exactly what we'll look at now. So let's create list2, L2 equals hello. Then let's put a number. So we've got a string, we're going to put a number, let's put a boolean, and let's put so that's an integer. Now let's put a floating number. Create that. And if we look at L2, then we've got that list. There it is. It contains all 4 different types of data that we'll be looking at. So that's pretty handy. You can make your list as long or as short as you like. And the next thing is actually a list can contain a lists as its element. So let's say L3 can be a list of, let's say the sentence, how are you? Then we'll say a number, 55, and then we'll add one of our existing lists into there. So my first list in there. So let's run that and look at our list. So you can see that we've got the text, so that's one element, which is a string. Then we've got an integer, and then the next element is a list. Now, lists of lists are a bit more of a complex topic, and we'll get to it further down the course, especially when we're dealing with matrices. We'll need that. But it's just good to know for us for now that you can indeed do that. You can create a list that not only contains a mix of data types, but it actually contains even lists within itself. Now what I wanted to show you was another function. So let's put a delimiter here and look at the next function, which is range. I know we haven't talked about functions a lot. In fact, we've actually touched on range a bit, but in general, we haven't talked about a lot about functions, and that tutorial is coming. Don't worry, it's just around the corner. But nevertheless, we will need this function in order to learn how to generate more lists. So here's an example. The function we're going to be looking at is range, which we used, if you remember, for our for loops when we need to generate a range of numbers that we would like to iterate over. So let's have a look now. So if I run range 15, what I get is a range 0 to 15. Now bear with me, we're just going to change this code a little bit. We're going to say list. We want to change range into a list. And then we get this. And now I'd like to explain a little bit. So this is Python 3. So in Python 3, range is an iterator, or as some say, it's a generator. It used to be different. So in Python 2, range, so in Python 3, this is the same as xrange in Python 2. So in Python 2, when you used to call range, what you would get right away would be a list like this. So you just get a list, and that's beautiful. You can iterate over it, you can work with it, and so on. So why did this change in Python 3? Well, in Python 3, this changed because a lot of the time range is used not because we actually need that list and need access to it and need it to be stored in memory, but because a lot of the time we just want to perform some certain aggregation or calculation over that list, and we don't really need the list itself. So for instance, you might want to iterate over that list, or you might want to look at the sum of that list or perform some other mathematical operation. And in that case, taking up memory for that whole list is not really sensible. And therefore, in Python 3, now when you create range 15, what it does is it creates this iterator or generator kind of object. And that means that it will still have the values when you need them, but it just won't store them in memory. So if you do actually want to change it into a list like we do in our case, so we want to create a list of 15 values or 15 integers 0 to 14, in that case in Python 3 you need to type in list range 15. So basically this used to be in the xRange function in Python 2, and now they decided to change it to the range function. So most of the time if you use range you will be using it for these reasons, but if you actually want a list, then you need to put the list word with brackets around range. So there we go. And why are we looking at this function? Because it's very convenient to generate sequences of numbers. So instead of sitting there and typing out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on, it's much easier. So there's that list, or much easier to say, let's say we want to put in a variable. Let's say x is like that, and then we want to look at x. There it is. Or we could have said just y equals list range, and how many elements do we want? In total we want, so I'll show you in a second how we're going to do that. So for starters, if we want to start with a 0, we would say 8, right? And then we look at y. You'll see it goes from 0 to 7. But in our case, we want to start with a 1, and you can also do that with list range. So here you'd say z equals list range, and here you would say where to start. So usually if you just specify one value, that is where you want to end. So from 0 up to this value, not including this value. But if you want to start a specific point, you just say 1, comma, that value. So if you run this now and look at z, you'll see that it starts at 1, goes to 7. So let's practice again. Let's say z2, and let's say we want to start at 100 and we want to go up to 120. If we run that and look at z2, you'll see that we've got that a list, 100, 101, and so on, 119. Once again, remember that this last one is not inclusive. So if you actually wanted 120, you type in 121 here, rerun this line as well, and there it is, 120. And one more parameter that you can specify for range, let's call this w, and let's make this a bit less, let's say up to 110, 111, so 110 inclusive. You can specify what step. So by default, the step is 1, and that's what we're seeing here. Every time it's incremented by 1, you can specify a different step. You can say, for instance, 2. So if I say 2 and I look at w, you'll see that we get only the even numbers between 100 and 110, because 111 is not inclusive. There we go. 100, 102, 104, and so on. So if you want something else, you could say with a step of 10 from 100 to 200, or 201, for example. So if we run that, look at w2, you'll see that we get 100, 110, 120, all the way to 200. So it's a very handy tool in your arsenal. If you just want to generate numbers from 0 up to a certain number, then you just specify that one number like we did over here. Or you can specify the start, the finish, or you can even specify the start, the finish, and the step. And it is a convenient tool because it allows you to create lists very quickly, and you can use those for iterations, or you can use those for actual computations and just for practice. Basically, it's very handy for practice as well. So there we go. That's how we create lists in Python. There are several methods. We looked at the square brackets method, and we looked at using the range function combined with the list function. Have a go at that, play around with those methods, see what kind of lists you can create, and in the next tutorial we will continue working with lists. I look forward to seeing you then, and until next time, happy coding!